Well, for those of you who are here with us already, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning, or at least it's beautiful here. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Reichert, and I am a child psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. I co-direct our pediatric anxiety clinic as well as our Stanford Parenting Center. I want to begin by thanking everyone who's joining us today, especially on a Saturday morning. It's truly an honor to be with you, and we really appreciate you taking the time for this educational workshop on organizational skills training. So before we get started this morning, I just wanted to share with people a series of upcoming events that our Stanford Parenting Center will be hosting over the upcoming months. We're going to be continuing our Positive Parenting During COVID-19 webinar series with 3 additional webinars that are planned for this spring. These webinars are going to be addressing topics such as resiliency during stressful times, as well as how caregivers can be supporting their teens through upcoming transitions, and ways for families and younger children to be preparing for summer and the transition back to school and in-person learning. So those will be posted on our website, and we will be updating the date and time as that information becomes more solidified. So definitely stay tuned for that. We are also going to be continuing to host our Positive Parenting groups, which are 4-week group series that are designed to offer more personalized parenting tools. We're currently offering several group series, which you can see here on this slide. And I wanted to make a special note that following today's presentation, following today's workshop, we're going to be recruiting for our organizational skills training group that is going to be expanding on a lot of what's going to be discussed today. And I'm going to let Dr. Long speak to that a little bit more, and we can talk more about that at the end. So during the presentation, I will be sure to send out in the chat function a link to sign up for more information about our groups. These groups are offered at a fee for service to parents, but we do have scholarships available. And so we just ask that you please use the link to sign up to be on our list so that we can be letting you know about when that next group is going to be running and the specific dates and time. I'm also going to be providing a link to the Stanford Parenting Center website, where you can find additional information about our upcoming events, as well as recordings of past webinars that we've done over the past year. This will also all come to you in a follow-up email after today's workshop. Okay. So let me go ahead and now introduce you to Dr. Kan Long, who is a postdoctoral fellow in our Stanford Parenting Center and Child Anxiety Clinic. Dr. Long has an expertise and passion for working with youth and their families struggling with symptoms of anxiety, as well as ADHD and difficulties with executive functioning. I'm very excited that Dr. Long is able to be with us this morning and share her expertise regarding ways that parents can really support their children in their organizational skill development. As many of us are at home with children and trying to navigate the many new and different challenges this past year has brought, including those related to school and learning, we really wanted to create a workshop that would support some of the difficulties that children and their caregivers face. As most of our children have been learning virtually in some capacity for the past year, and as many prepare to return to in-person school or are already engaged in some version of in-person learning, we have really seen a dramatic increase in difficulties with focus, organization, and time management. For some children, these challenges were there before the pandemic started and have since been exacerbated. And then for other children, you might be seeing some of these issues for the first time. Regardless, I think we can all agree that the uncertainty of the past year and the frequent changes to the way that children are engaging with learning in school have made things more difficult. So today's workshop is going to really focus on what we refer to as organizational skills training, or OST for short. That's the acronym we use. We hope that this workshop will give you a better understanding of ways that you can help support your child's organizational skills, which can have a really powerful impact on their academic performance and proficiency, as well as really helping to reduce tensions at home and positively impact family relationships. So now I want to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Long. Please feel free to send questions using the chat feature during the presentation, and we will be sure to be reserving time towards the end of the hour to answer some of your questions today. We really appreciate you being here. I'll let Dr. Long take it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the lovely introduction, Dr. Reichert. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about organizational skills training. Next slide, please. So I first just want to talk a little bit about why organizational skills are important. Organizational skills include a variety of different abilities that are necessary for most of what we do during the day. So for parents, you use organizational skills every day when you supervise your kids on Zoom, you schedule your work meetings, you make sure you have all the ingredients you need to make dinner and find time to do errands. And for kids, they need organizational skills to know what their homework is and when it's due, what they need to be able to do their homework, and how much time they need to finish it. And in particular, it's the skills in organization, time management, and planning that are most important for children to be able to develop. And for some kids, they're able to pick this up as they go along, and other kids need help to learn how to stay organized, manage their time, and plan. And this is actually quite common. So about 50 to 55% of kids with ADHD have difficulties in these areas. And challenges with organization are also not exclusive to ADHD, and many children can benefit from support in learning organizational skills. So what do difficulties with organization, time management, and planning look like? So they can be things like forgetting assignments and when they might be due, missing schoolwork or homework, misplacing or losing items that might be needed to get something done, starting a project the night before it's due, and also having a hard time being able to finish things. And I'm sure as I went through this list, parents, you were probably able to think of an example or two. And as if you've probably experienced, these things don't usually happen only once or twice. And what we know is that organizational difficulties can continue to be a challenge or even get worse over time. And as kids go through each grade, what they're asked to do and keep track of and manage expands. So you might have already noticed the textbooks and workbooks getting bigger and bigger. And when kids start middle school, they have to deal with different teachers and assignments and tests. And it's around third grade that difficulties with organization become more noticeable, and kids will start to experience some of the adverse consequences. So it's between third and sixth grade. That's when we really want to help kids develop organization, time management, and planning skills so that they're ready for high school, college, jobs, and relationships. Next slide, please. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit, which is an evidence-based treatment developed by Howard Abacoff and Richard Gallagher at NYU that focuses on helping kids to build skills to improve organizational functioning. So a clinical trial of organizational skills training has demonstrated that children who receive this treatment show improvements in organizational skills and functioning. And in addition to that, they also experience positive changes in academic performance and proficiency. They have fewer homework problems. And there's also improvements in family relationships and less family conflict related to organizational difficulties. So I'll be drawing from the principles of organizational skills training for our workshop today as we talk about 4 key areas of organizational functioning and ways that you can support your kids in learning and building organizational skills. Next slide, please. So when you want to start to talk to your kids about organization and help them to develop these skills, it's very important to pay attention to common misconceptions of organizational difficulties. A lot of the times, these challenges can end up being misinterpreted as negative personal attributes. So that's things like being unmotivated or not making enough effort, being careless, or being lazy. And so it's very helpful for parents to be mindful of this and to communicate your acceptance and support of your child. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the first organizational skill area that we'll discuss is tracking assignments. Next slide, please. So tracking assignments involves keeping track of short and long-term assignments and due dates. So what are some of the most common ways that challenges in this area show up? So a classic one might be when you ask if there's any homework and your child says they don't have any homework or nothing was assigned that day. And this can vary by school and by grade, but it is something where maybe a few days of there being no homework might be plausible. During remote learning, some teachers may assign a packet on Monday that's due later in the week. But if you're consistently hearing there's no homework, it might be a sign that assignments are not being tracked. Another very common one is when kids suddenly realize maybe at 6 or 7 p.m. that an assignment or project is due the next day. And so an organizational skill that can be particularly helpful for tracking assignments and due dates is using a planner and a calendar. Next slide, please. So a planner will give your kids an efficient way to track their assignments and due dates each day. So before the age of COVID, most of your kids would have received a planner from their school. And it usually looks something like this here on the left with separate columns for days and rows for subjects. And as you can see, the planner only covers the week. And there could be things that are due further out, like in 2 or 3 weeks. So having your kids transfer that information to a monthly calendar is also helpful so that they can see what they have coming up and keep track of their long-term assignments as well. Next slide, please. And for a lot of your kids, they may not have been given a planner this year, and their teachers may be assigning homework online through Google Classroom or Schoology. And so the good news is that tracking assignments can also be digital, and your kids can enter their daily and long-term assignments and due dates into an online calendar or a calendar application. And the online or technology aspect of this can be a little more motivating for kids than writing something down. There's also a way to customize the colors in the background. And I think one of the nice things too about a digital calendar is that you don't need both the planner and the calendar. You're able to combine those two things in one way of tracking. And I think a bonus of using a digital calendar is the device that your kids love so much can be used for something other than games or streaming. Next slide, please. Okay. So the second organizational skills area is materials management. Next slide, please. So materials management involves managing the materials, supplies, and belongings that are needed for school or extracurriculars. So some of the common challenges related to materials management can be things like leaving homework at home or leaving papers or workbooks that are needed to complete homework at school. And so during remote learning, these types of situations are less common. But another typical challenge with materials management might be misplacing something or not being able to find something when it's needed. And this continues to come up even if classes are on Zoom. And so an organizational skill that can be particularly helpful for managing materials is a binder, and in particular, an accordion binder. Next slide, please. So, typically kids receive a lot of different handouts and papers and worksheets at school that can be really tough to manage. And so an accordion binder will help them to have one place to put everything, and it can be organized by subject. So the benefits of the accordion binder are that it's easy to open and close. You can put things in and take things out. So regular 3-ring binders involve a bunch of steps. You have to get a 3-hole punch. You have to punch the paper, open up the rings, which sometimes takes a lot of strength, close them. And then if you want to take something out, you have to do the whole thing again. And if the majority of papers your child is dealing with now are printouts or homework, you can have your child practice using the accordion binder to manage these papers. And they can also practice putting other things they need for class in there as well, which could be school supplies or even the book they're reading for ELA. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So the third organizational skill area is time management. Next slide, please. So time management involves tracking and managing time effectively in relation to completing homework and other tasks. So some of the common challenges related to time management can be things like getting distracted or sidetracked and spending, 3 hours on an assignment that the teacher says should only take 45 minutes. So another common one is underestimating the amount of time that might be needed to complete an assignment or task. It can also go the other way, where something might seem to your child that it could take 3 days or forever when it could be completed in a shorter amount of time. And so time estimation is a helpful skill to support your kids in learning time management. Next slide, please. So one of the ways you can help your kids to practice time estimation is to get a stopwatch, or you can pull it up on your phone. There's a stopwatch app that's very convenient, and have your kids predict how long they think an activity will take. So this can be school related, it can be homework related, but it can also be things like how long it takes to make a sandwich or run around the block or make their bed. And then you can help your child time how long the activity takes and then compare their prediction to the actual amount of time. And this is a way to help them build an awareness of time and develop a sense of how long things take. And one of the other things that can be very helpful with time management is, for example, you can help them time how long it takes to do 1 or 2 math problems. So they might predict that and then they would time it. And then you can kind of move on to doing, let's say, a page of math problems and then 2 pages of math problems. And if you kind of help them be able to practice going from a couple to a page to 2 pages, they're going to be able to build an even stronger sense of how long these types of activities take. Okay, next slide, please. So the fourth and final organizational skills area is task planning. Next slide, please. So task planning involves breaking a task down into steps and fitting steps into a schedule. And so the most common way that challenges in this area show up are usually related to a lack of planning, which can be something like doing a project in one day. So parents, you might also be very familiar with your child asking you to do a lot of the planning and steps of the project for them. And a very common situation might be when you see a combination of difficulties with time management and planning, where there is a very short amount of time to complete a project. And so then everyone kind of is together scrambling, trying to put it together. And so task planning is one of the most difficult organizational skills. And so it is expected that your kids will need support and assistance. And one of the ways that you can help your kids to practice planning is to work with them to figure out what all the steps for completing a task should be. So sometimes kids will break down steps to be either too small or too big. So an example of a step that might be too small, example of steps that might be too small might be something like getting a pencil, then getting paper, then an eraser, when a step could be just to get all of the supplies. An example of a step that is too big might be something like finish the project. So, parents, your help will be really important as your kids learn how to break a project down into a practical series of steps and then figuring out what day and at what time they'll be completed. Next slide, please. And so, a helpful way to think about this is you are building the steps, slowly building that bridge to get from the start of the project to the end. And so, one of the things that can be very helpful is once you've broken down the steps, to also help your kids put the steps in order. So sometimes when you're brainstorming the steps, you might just come up with a bunch of different ones. And then it's helpful to also pause and think about, okay, so now what order should I do these steps in? So that's the next step. After you have the steps, is to think about, okay, what order should we do them in? Another thing that can be helpful is for each step, what are the materials that are needed? What do I need to get? What do I need to make sure I have so that I can complete this step for the project? And then the last part is also helping your kids to think about, okay, when should I take these different steps and put them in my schedule? When will I have time to be able to do this? And so when you're practicing task planning, just as you did with time estimation, it is also possible to do both school and homework related things, as well as fun things, just so that your kids have a chance to really engage and practice this skill. And so some examples might be you could plan baking cupcakes, or you could plan, going to the park. And so this is a way that kids can really have fun as they learn this organizational skill. Okay. So this brings us to the end of the presentation portion of our workshop. Um, Before we move on to the question and answer, we know that some families may be interested in additional support to help your children learn and develop organizational skills. So we will be holding a 4-week organizational skills training group for parents in April. And if you'd like to register, we've included the link in the chat and you'll also receive it by email.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Long, for that wonderful presentation. At this point, we can go ahead and turn it over to questions and answer section of our presentation today. And I already have received a bunch of different questions from parents, and so I'm going to try to see how many we can get through. I want to start with a question that several parents asked was around modifications to this. So thinking about, it seems like, and I know definitely here in California, there are still a lot of schools who are still in a pretty virtual learning mode, as well as also doing the hybrid learning. And so a few different parents were asking around additional ways to kind of modify some of this for kind of the virtual world. And one parent in particular was asking about the accordion binder, and kind of loving that. It seems like they really like that idea of the accordion binder, and yet their child's not really getting many worksheets currently. And is there any way you might suggest adapting that skill?
Yes, it's a great question, and I think so relevant to what everyone is dealing with. So I touched a little bit on this with tracking assignments. So a lot of kids right now are going to be getting their assignments online through Google Classroom. And so one adaptation of that planner calendar skill is to use a digital calendar. And so one of the great things about that is actually if, for example, there's a to-do list in Google Classroom, kids can actually pull that up and then copy and paste that over to a Google Calendar app, for example. And one of the great things about the application, if you use it, is you can actually place it on the day it's assigned. If it's not completed that day, you can drag it to the next day to make sure that it stays on your radar. And then once you complete it, you can actually click complete and then it will kind of gray out or get crossed out. So it's a way to both manage what you have to do and once you've completed it. Another very helpful adaptation of tracking assignments for remote learning is also, a very common thing that we hear too is that so kids don't have to bring homework physically to school to turn it in. And yet they still have to take pictures and upload things and make sure they hit submit. So a very common thing that's happening as well is sometimes kids will upload their homework. They spent so long working on it, they got it done, they upload it, and then they forgot to hit submit, or they forgot to send the picture into their teacher. So adding sort of another sort of checkbox right next to the assignment saying, did I submit it? Did I turn it in? Is also very helpful to make sure that the homework the kids are working so hard on, actually they get credit for and turning it in. I think materials management is another skill area where adaptations to Zoom school and remote learning are very helpful. So the accordion binder, I think it's helpful because it's a centralized location to keep everything. And so it helps with things getting misplaced or lost. And of course, yeah, your kids may not be getting a lot of papers right now. So materials management actually is really about being able to keep track of the things that you need, the things that are important. Another part of it, though, is also organizing your workspaces and living spaces. So, another helpful materials management skill that parents you can help your kids with is something we call getting ready to go. And so what that includes is essentially, okay, so when you sit down for Zoom school for the day, thinking before you do that, okay, what are the things I need? So maybe you do need your textbook on hand, you need your workbook, you need pencils, you need a notebook. So thinking about, okay, what do I need? And then going to make sure you get those things before you start. And then you wrap up Zoom school for the day. Okay, so then it's like, okay, so why don't I go ahead and put these things back in a central location? So it's the same place every day where I keep all these things. Once I'm done with them, I'm going to put them back. And then you can actually have a chance to practice this same skill, this same process with homework. It's like, okay, so you take a little break after Zoom school and you're going to start to do homework. Okay, so that's the same process. So, okay, so what do I need to do my homework? And then again, getting those supplies before you start doing your homework. Another helpful thing to include as part of this getting ready to go is also thinking about, okay, I have all the things I need. Now, let me also check and look around me. Are there any distractions? Is there anything maybe that doesn't need to be here? Like maybe my iPad is here. Maybe my puppy is running around in the background. So you can also both get the things you need and also think about removing distractions. Then you do the work. And then at the end, it's wrapping up. It's okay, here are the things I used for homework. These are important. I need them. Let me put them back in the same place each time. And so this achieves kind of two things. It helps your kids be able to think about what they need before they get started, removing any distractions, but it also helps to keep their workspace clear. And for a lot of you, that workspace might be your dining room or your living room table. And so it'll be nice to be able to have those spaces back. So you can all eat dinner there again, or you can all watch TV there together again without there being a lot of school supplies hanging around.
And so I think kind of another question that's come in that takes that a little bit of a step further is also around this notion of kids wanting to play video games or, engage in YouTube or, wanting to obviously do something different than maybe engaging in their schoolwork or engaging in their classroom activity. And so one parent was asking if there was any suggestions around how to kind of manage from like that materials management perspective around how to manage kind of clearing their space from video games or other things on the internet. And I know, Dr. Long, you and I have talked a lot about this, and this is something that we hear very frequently, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think something that comes up a lot, I think. And so I think you can actually talk to your kids about where are you going to store devices? So there could be a specific place that you store the device that is ideally not in the workspace when they're, either on Zoom school or they are doing their homework. So there can be a place that device lives. And then I think also we think about it because now workspaces have become so much more digital, right? Kids are doing a lot of homework on their computers and online. And so you can actually engage in this similar process. So you pull up their screen, right? And you're going to pull up the window that they need, for example, to do their online assignment or to, be able to read their textbook online. And so part of this process of getting ready is, okay, which windows do I need? What are the resources, the tabs I'm going to need to pull up in order to do this assignment? Oh, and if Steam is on in the background or YouTube is on in the background, is that actually something that's needed for this assignment? Kind of walk them through closing that. And I think this is kind of also, it gets into screen time a little bit too. And that parents, there are actually a lot of different ways that you can navigate this in terms of potentially not having internet access, for example, for a certain period of time, if, for example, the textbook is available offline, or kind of structuring things so that these websites maybe aren't available for a certain period of time while they're doing their homework.
And I think kind of another thing that comes to mind for me as well, Dr. Long, is also just for some families who have difficulty with kind of managing those tabs, right, that are open, or you come back to your child's workspace and they've quickly minimized something, right, and we don't know what it is. There are a lot of programs out there now that you can actually install on the computer that help to kind of track where your child is spending their time on the internet, or actually block, different parental controls to block different websites that can go up during school hours or during homework hours, and then go off during those free time hours, which can also be just kind of an added tool that can help to support kids.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that came up was around, how do you know when it's not just kind of a lack of effort and it's an actual organizational skill deficit? And I know we hear this a lot too, of, my child just isn't putting enough effort into this, or, they're just not trying hard enough, versus when we might really think about it as kind of potentially an executive functioning concern or an organizational skills deficit.
Yeah, so there are two kind of general hypotheses about what might cause organizational skills difficulties in kids with ADHD. So one is that, some of those core symptoms of ADHD, like having a hard time paying attention or being a little bit hyperactive and impulsive, can actually contribute to these difficulties. If you think about it, if a kid is sitting in class and kind of daydreaming, they may miss the assignment that's actually been given out. Another hypothesis is that there are, some kids do have difficulties with executive functioning. And these are things like having a hard time being able to hold things in mind and remember them, be able to decide, okay, I'm going to not do this right now, I'm going to do this first, and things like that. And so these are, processes that can be, that are important in order for kids to be able to engage in organizational skills. And so that does happen. And I think in terms of distinguishing, I think the most important thing is kind of, as I touched on early in the presentation, that very common misconceptions are that for kids where organization doesn't come as naturally, that it is a lack of effort or that they're not trying hard enough. And so I think a helpful metaphor here is to think about it the way that you might think about it if your child was, for example, better at math and science and they had a harder time with ELA, is that, everyone has things that they come naturally, that they excel at, and things where they need support. And so I think approaching it that way is like, okay, so if your child had a harder time with ELA, you would acknowledge that. You would acknowledge, okay, math and science, they seem to be doing really well and they're kind of doing that on their own, but ELA, they need some support. So I think thinking about it that way and providing that support so that they can actually have a chance to learn and practice.
And I guess similarly, Dr. Long, thinking about that level of support, some parents are kind of asking, is it a disservice if I'm constantly kind of coming and prompting my child or reminding my child to do different things, or really kind of giving a lot of this support in their organization of things, versus kind of listing things out in a more centralized location, or trying to take a step back and them doing it on their own. And so I'm curious, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that can be helpful with this is prompting is actually very helpful for kids who have a hard time with organizational skills. One of the things that can be helpful is to sort of pick one thing. So, we went over, sort of key skills in each of these areas. So to pick one thing and then kind of talk to your child about, okay, like this is something that's really helpful. This is what we're going to kind of practice over the next week or two. And, I'm going to give you some reminders because I want to help you with this. And then I think one of the things that's really nice is The prompts are great. And we also want to add some praise in there. So you want to also add a positive aspect to this interaction. So reminders are very helpful. And then once you see your child learning and practicing the skill, is really giving them a lot of positive attention and praise, because this is something that's not easy to do, and they're trying it and they're engaging with it. And so making sure that you also have that positive part of it. And that's how you can kind of balance out the reminders with having positive interactions with your kids.
And for those kids who give a lot of pushback and who might get present with a lot of anger and frustration when they're trying to engage in schoolwork, because it's that much harder for them to be organized and stay on top of their things. Is there any way to try to help motivate them to want to engage in some of these organizational skills that you're going over today, and try to kind of make it more fun, I guess, than boring?
Yeah, of course. And so that's also a very common situation. And so I think I will add to what I just said in terms of the praising, in terms of the prompting and the praising. Parents, you can also try developing what we call a reward system. And so some of you may already have this at home, for chores, for example, or, different tasks that your kids are doing, they can earn a reward. So this can be very helpful where you want to decide, okay, what is the skill I'm hoping to help them with? And so we'll talk about it and we'll set it up. And then can they earn a reward or some kind of privilege for actually practicing this skill? So I think that's one thing, is that's a way that we can increase motivation, is to attach something positive that can be earned to an organizational skill. I think another thing that can be very helpful is that, for a lot of kids with organizational difficulties, they do receive a lot of negative feedback during the day, and they don't feel very good about these things that are hard. And there, of course, can a lot of times be consequences for some of these challenges. And so I think it's also very helpful as part of communicating that, acceptance and support for your child, is actually not linking these challenges with who they are as a person, because they're not doing these things on purpose. These things are just very difficult and they're not coming naturally. So I think that's another way that can help, is when you're talking about these issues, to really separate them out. Be like, okay, yeah, this was really tough. And you know what? This is really tough. And let's figure this out together. Let's figure out how we can help you with this, so that things can feel better. And then you can kind of also feel like this is more manageable.
I really like that idea. And I guess what that makes me also think about is, for some families, kind of taking that step back and taking a look at just your own organization as a parent and as a family, and taking steps towards improving your organization as a family, so that there's also not necessarily just kind of targeted on our one child who's particularly struggling in this area, but that we're all going to be taking steps forward over the next few weeks to try to improve our organization and time management, so that there's kind of this shared effort, and that we're doing it in a way that's supporting one another. That can be helpful. That's great.
Yeah. And I think, to your point also about making it fun, is I think that's one of the great things about helping your kids practice these skills, is you can be very creative and very flexible. So, I think for time management and planning, those maybe come a little bit easier. You can think of lots of fun things to try to estimate how long they're going to take. You might even see your kids, kids love stopwatches. You might even see them kind of timing you on something. So that's a kind of fun interaction that you can have. For planning, as I said, you can plan fun activities too, because actually planning helps make fun things even more fun. So for example, if you want to go to the park and play something, you want to make sure you have the thing that you want to bring to the park. So that's one part of it. But I think even with, tracking assignments and materials management, there's also ways to make it fun. So with tracking assignments, if you're using that, online calendar or even the planner, you can also put fun things in there. Like, oh, this is family movie nights happening on this night. Or, kind of tracking other activities that they're really looking forward to. So it's not just homework in there, but there's also things that they're looking forward to. And for materials management also, your kids may have hobbies that they really enjoy. There may be things they really like to do as a family, you'd like to do as a family. And so thinking about, okay, well, where do we keep all of those things, so that anytime for example, if you have a board game night, Okay, so it would make sense. We want to make sure all the pieces are in there. We want to make sure all the board games are in the same place so we can find them. So there's a lot of ways to actually take these skills and expand them out to just things in your daily routine in general that aren't just school homework focused.
I love that. Yeah. It's like adopting a organizational skills lifestyle and
Yes,
infusing that
exactly.
in. We've definitely had a couple questions come through with regards to uh, what we refer to as kind of comorbid challenges. So,
Mhm.
so when a child is diagnosed with ADHD, but also maybe struggling with an anxiety disorder, or may also be struggling with depression, or a kind of a depressed mood. And parents, I guess, that I think kind of trying to specifically answer that question is hard, and I want to acknowledge that, and that it's also hard, of course, for the family and for the child, but hard in the context of today's workshop. But I guess just wanting to touch on that for a moment in terms of just the importance of recognizing that when a child is struggling with multiple different things, which is very common, especially with ADHD. We do see children struggling with other things as well as ADHD. Of making sure that you're seeking that more professional support, and making sure that you're kind of taking that additional step to get your child linked with a therapist, a psychologist, a mental health provider of some sort, to be able to provide that more specific intervention that might be helpful to just improve their overall functioning. And Dr. Long, I don't know if there's anything else that you would say along those lines, but I just wanted to put that out there because we have had a couple questions come through.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's an incredibly tough situation when there's, that many things going on. And also for kids with ADHD, they can experience anxiety in relation to school and homework because of some of these organizational challenges, and having these organizational challenges can sometimes lead to, decreased engagement in school, less interest in school, um, and kind of general negative feelings about having to go to class every day and having to do homework. And so I think it's also helpful to keep that in mind, is that so maybe once, those anxiety symptoms and those depression symptoms go down a little bit, that working on organizational skills is a direct way to improve functioning. And so, anecdotally, I can say that for a lot of kids who have organizational challenges, having a chance to actually learn them and practice them and get support in doing that can help improve self-esteem. And kids start to feel better about themselves. And also that, okay, like, so I have a plan for this. I know what to do so that I can make sure I know what my homework is and I make sure I turn it in. And then I know where all my things are. And so improving that functioning in this area actually, can lead to improvements overall in how your kids are feeling.
Sure. I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to also just direct the audience's attention. I'm sure you're seeing it because it's the slide that's in front of you at the moment, but we did transition to our additional resources slide. And I just wanted to orient you for a moment to this because we did have a couple questions come in around additional resources. And kind of in the kind of top middle, you can see a couple of different websites that we've just chosen to put out there that can be great resources. CHAD is our ADHD organization, our national ADHD organization, that has some great information and resources and tools for families. We have our websites there that are kind of touching on a bunch of the different services that we provide, as well as educational webinars and things along those lines. Understood.org is another fantastic resource. I know Dr. Long and I use this a lot with the families that we work with. It gives you a lot of worksheets and different tools and strategies, as well as has different little blogs and kind of very easily digestible pieces of information for parents across kind of all things related to learning. And really, I think, pairs nicely with what we've been talking about today. And then the Child Mind Institute, they have another wealth of resources for parents as well on their website around all sorts of mental health and well-being issues. Down at the bottom, we have just some local community resources, and we recognize that you may not be local if you're joining us today, but for those of you who are local, these are some local resources, and Parents Helping Parents is definitely by far the resource that I turn to the most with a lot of my families that I work with. And it's a great resource that's here that has a lot of also a lot of workshops, a lot of groups, a lot of support for parents. And then on the left here, we're also indicating the Organized Child book. And Dr. Long, I don't know if you want to speak to that just for a moment, just to orient people to this book.
Sure, yes. And I know we did get a question about book recommendations. So it's a very helpful book. So this is written by Richard Gallagher, who developed organizational skills training, the evidence-based treatment that our workshop was based on today. And this is a book actually specifically written for parents. So it will be able to walk you through how do you actually, set up a way to practice this, help your kids learn. And so it's a very useful resource.
That's great. And I guess the last question that we can kind of end on today is that we did have a question come through around recognizing that organizational skills training seems best kind of in the kind of learning by doing setting, and that kind of more application based practice. And wondering if there are workshops for kids that really do this sort of work directly with kids. And I'm wondering if maybe we can just speak to that for a moment. Just on a broader, not necessarily what we offer, but just on a broader level.
Yes. So, I know we've touched on this. So we are going to be offering a parents group that will walk you through some of these things. And then, typically organizational skills training, the treatment is offered as an individual treatment. And it's usually about 20 weeks, twice a week. So if that's something that you're interested in, that's how it's usually delivered. That's what you would have access to. And I think, there are also some efforts, I think, in schools, for example, to focus on some of these skills in groups. And so I think that's some of the ways that you might be able to access organizational skills training, the treatment intervention.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Long. Well, at this point, we are just a little bit over the 45-minute mark, and I am going to, oh, it looks like we have one last question coming in. so just in the interest of time, we will address this last question coming in, and then we will wrap up. But it is an important question, and one that we do see often, and that does come up often around dual households, when a child lives between two parent households. In an example is a divorced family setting, and just if we could, I guess, think through a little bit of how we might recommend or support parents in managing that, especially when a child is struggling with organizational skills, and maybe one household is spending more time on that, and the other household isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly it can be something that is challenging when there's two households. One thing that can be helpful is for parents, for both of you to be on the same page. So now you may set up your households differently, you may have different routines, and that's okay. It's just you want to come up with sort of the key things that you're helping your child to work on, and how are you going to support them in learning and practicing those skills at your different households. I think actually another thing that comes up too is materials management when there's two households, because your kids may have to bring a whole bunch of different things from mom to dad's and vice versa. So that actually is even an opportunity there to help your kid think through, okay, here are the things I need to make sure I pack, I need to make sure I bring back and forth. They could, also help them set up a bag, and what should they be putting in there as they're moving back and forth. And so I think, again, it's trying as best as you can to have there be some consistency across the two households. Where, okay, so let's say you've decided you're going to try to work on tracking assignments. So what is that going to look like at mom's? What is that going to look like at dad's? I think, using the digital version of this can be helpful, because then it's in the cloud, it's online, it can be accessed wherever your child is. So I think sometimes getting creative and thinking about things like that. So things that might actually be easily translatable from household to household.
I love that. I think those are great suggestions. Thank you, Dr. Long. All right. In the interest of time, we will wrap up for today, but we really appreciate everyone who was able to attend and join us, and we appreciate everyone's questions. We will follow up with an email with these important links. And we wish you the best of luck with everything and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.